Okay, ladies and gentlemen, could you take your seats, please? Anybody not seated in the next 3 minutes will have their seat sold to someone else. You don't. To Bob. Please, if you can be seated. I have extremely important things to say. I know. They will. You'll miss out on my pearls of wisdom if you don't take your seat. And thank you all for coming. Thank you. Thank you. Well, good evening, friends and lovers of the book and library. It's so good to see you all here to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Freedom to Read Foundation. I'm Bert Joseph, the Vice President of the Foundation, and I want to welcome you tonight to this beautiful modern wing designed by Renzo Piano of the Art Institute of Chicago. Feel free. For those of you from out of town, I trust it'll be the basis of a regular visit to this wonderful city. We would not be here this evening without the help and support of countless volunteers and individuals and friends of libraries and Freedom to Read. I particularly want to thank our silver and bronze sponsors whose contributions to the Freedom to Read Foundation allow us to continue our work and to host tonight's celebration. Those sponsors include the silver sponsors, American Library Association, Jim Reddick, President, the Center for Democracy, the Center for Democracy and Technology, the McCormick Foundation, and our bronze sponsors, the American Library Association Publishing Department, Mary A. Dempsey and Philip H. Corboy, the one and only Robert P. Doyle, Executive Director. John K. Horaney from Dallas, Texas, one of our valuable trustees and lawyers. The Hugh M. Hefner Foundation, Matt Piccoli, Christy Hefner, who have been invaluable in their support. And perhaps most importantly, the family of Judith F. Krug. There's another group of sponsors, another group of individuals I'm pleased to recognize. I hope you noticed our costume greeters as you entered the museum. Style from the Stacks project runway at the Illinois Library Association was quite possibly the first ever library fashion show with designs inspired by libraries and literature. The show was created and modeled by the library staff and held at the 2008 ILA conference in Chicago last fall. We're delighted the library staff from the fashion show could join us as welcome guests. Weren't those costumes fabulous? I also would like to give special recognition to Tom Allen, the new president of the Association of American Publishers. Tom? It's a 40-year anniversary celebration of the Freedom to Read Foundation. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the dedication, contribution, and an enormous debt that we owe to our founder, Judith F. Krug. Judy was a friend of us all, and she has had a profound impact on the whole concept of freedom to read, and she embodied the First Amendment values that we all treasured so. She left a most enduring legacy, and I hope you will read the material that is at your table and listen to what the speakers have to say about Judith, a most unique individual who probably did more for libraries and the freedom to read than virtually anyone else in the 40 years in which she was the director. Now I want you to enjoy this beautiful building, the wonderful surroundings, the fabulous art, and the good company that I'm sure you will find at each table. I might add, we learned that there are museum restrictions that prohibit the drinking of red wine or coffee here in this beautiful room, but you could note it's the same restrictions that the benefactors had to suffer through when they were hosts here. So, what can I say? We're in good company. I hope you'll forgive that inconvenience in the name of art and exquisite and extraordinary architecture. We will resume our program after dinner. Until then, buono appetito.
On tiptoes. Good evening, everybody. I'm Judy Platt, president of the Freedom to Read Foundation. I'm so pleased that all of you are here tonight to recognize the many achievements of our award winners and to pay tribute to our colleague and our friend and our champion, Judy Krug. I promise to be very brief, but I must add a note to all that will be said about I'm not going to call her Judith, because when I first met her, she was Judy, and she will always be Judy. And I always said that I was also Judy, but with a small j. Of the personal and professional joys of my working life, I would put the collaboration, trust, and love that developed between Judy Krug and myself over the course of 25 years at the top of the list. Over the past few months, I have spoken often about Judy's abiding faith in the power of the community of the book. Her belief that when librarians and publishers and booksellers, and I have to acknowledge that the new president of the American Booksellers Association, Orrin Teicher, is also here tonight. But when authors and librarians and booksellers and publishers stand together in defense of free expression, we are unstoppable. And we send the book burners back to their dark little holes with their tails between their legs. If we are diminished by Judy's death, we are enriched by her legacy. We look around this evening and recognize in one another the shared passion. And we understand that the only way to truly receive and to honor her legacy is to continue this work with all of the courage that we can muster. That's what we're about this evening. What a beautiful setting we're in. The Modern Wing provides a backdrop, and what a wonderful audience. Joining me on the podium tonight is Gretchen Helfrich. Many of you will know her from her public radio work, producing and hosting the daily talk show Odyssey. The show originated from WBEZ here in Chicago and was carried nationally. Odyssey went on the air in 1998 and ended production in 2005. Gretchen is a frequent moderator for McCormick Freedom Museum events, and her interest in constitutional rights is exemplified by her recent studies at the University of Chicago Law School. And I understand Gretchen is studying for the bar exam, so we're doubly blessed to have her here tonight. We wanted the program to be seamless and meaningful, and we immediately thought of our dear friend, Gretchen Helfrich, host and producer par excellence. Gretchen, the program is all yours.
Thank you, Judith. Appreciate that. I am actually delighted to be here to join you all for the 40th anniversary of the Freedom to Read Foundation. I also want to say something about the planning and the venue here. We're in this beautiful, beautiful space, and one of the goals of the new Modern Wing here at the Art Institute has been to make museum goers rethink the connection between art and the world. And so we have galleries with works of art on one wall, and you turn around and you see the cityscape, the skyline of Chicago. Reconnecting that art with the city and with the broader world around it in a way that can make the experience of seeing art really radically new for some people, myself included. I'll cop to that. And I think that this building, in a way, that effect that it has is a lot like reading. It's a lot like reading a powerful book. A powerful book has that ability to make you rethink the connection between yourself, between the work that you're reading, and between the world, and even sometimes in radical ways. So I think that changing the way you see things is what this space is about. It's what so many of you are about, and I think this is a really terrific place to be holding this event. I understand that the foundation was one of the first non-museum groups to book the space, to use it for an event, and that doing so was a little bit risky because many months ago, when the decision was made to use this space, the space was still under construction. And for those of you who are from Chicago, you'll remember that it was under construction right up to the last second, really, before it opened. So there was some concern, some controversy about whether it was going to open on time, and some were worried that it would not. But of course, the foundation has never shied away from controversy. So you've booked this amazing space, and here we are, not a hard hat in sight. It's a really wonderful way to celebrate the remarkable career of the Foundation's Executive Director, Judith Krug, and to recognize her many achievements and the achievements of our award winners and supporters. So I'd like to begin the awards program by introducing the President of the American Library Association, Jim Reddick, who will present the Civic Achievement Award. Jim, where are you? There you are. Do you want my script? You want this?
Thank you, Gretchen. You got a page? Thank you. It is my pleasure to join you here tonight and to present the Civic Achievement Award. The award this year is presented to the McCormick Freedom Museum. It recognizes the McCormick Freedom Museum's success as an institution for civic education and engagement and its outstanding programs on the history and importance of the First Amendment. Through its short history, the Freedom Museum has provided programs and exhibits that educate and inspire students and the general public to better understand and protect their First Amendment rights. The museum also has become a valuable asset to us in our important work. Accepting the award to the museum is Mr. David Anderson, Vice President of Civic Programs at the McCormick Foundation. Mr. Anderson was the founding Executive Director of the McCormick Freedom Museum. Mr. Anderson, please join us.
Jim, Gretchen, thank you very much. It's a great honor for the McCormick Freedom Museum to receive this award, particularly with this being the 40th anniversary of the Freedom to Read Foundation's commitment to fight on behalf of the First Amendment, but also, of course, because of our honor to share the night with Judy Krug, a true champion of the First Amendment. We're honored to share the night with Herb and the rest of the Krug family. I want to thank the Freedom to Read Foundation and the American Library Association, their boards of directors, and the selection committees for choosing our young organization to receive this honor. In less than 3 years of operation, the museum, through the tireless work of a talented and dedicated staff, many of whom are here with us tonight, have reached more than 100,000 students, teachers, and members of the general public as we attempt to enlighten them about the importance of the First Amendment to our democracy. In 2003, the Board of Directors of the McCormick Foundation decided to set out and try and do something special to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the founding of the McCormick Foundation. They settled upon the creation of an institution which is based upon the three passions of our founder, Colonel Robert McCormick: the First Amendment, civic engagement, and Chicago. Now, judged by today's standards, for those of you who know the Colonel, it's possible or even likely that he would be judged harshly. However, for our purposes, we focus on the positive aspects of his commitment to these three concepts. His support of the First Amendment was evidenced by his personal involvement with and financing of the Neer versus Minnesota Supreme Court case. Many of you know, and I'm preaching to a choir here, I know, but for those of you who don't know, this important ruling extended the prohibition against prior restraint in publishing against state governments when it had previously been applied and interpreted to limit only federal action. On the civic engagement front, Colonel McCormick was a strong believer in civic involvement. He was elected an alderman to the city of Chicago. He was volunteered to serve on the sanitation district when they reversed the flow of the Chicago River. He volunteered for military duty with the National Guard and the 1st Infantry Division of the U.S. Army and served in battle in World War I. And he enabled and encouraged his staff and many employees of the Chicago Tribune to serve during World War II. He believed that citizens were responsible for making government work for the people and not the other way around. Finally, the colonel loved not only Chicago but the surrounding communities. Of course, they were mostly farming communities at the time as the suburbs weren't fully developed. And it was the colonel who coined the term Chicagoland, a term which lives on today. Now, the Freedom Museum merges these three concepts: his love of the First Amendment and its support of our political life, the vitally important notion of civic involvement, not just in government, but in our communities, and of course, his love of Chicagoland. While we no longer base our operations with our museum exhibits in the wonderful Tribune Tower, we remain committed to our mission by bringing our message to our audiences rather than having them come to us. It's cliché to say, but no less true, that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. While the Freedom Museum doesn't do all to protect freedom, we've made a point through education, promoting informed dialogue and civic participation to demonstrate that the cure for speech and thoughts and words that we don't like is more speech, more thought, more words, and an active, engaged citizenry. It's our belief that this will enhance our freedom and serve our democracy. On behalf of the McCormick Freedom Museum staff and board of directors, we want to thank you for honoring us with the Civic Achievement Award. Thank you.
I was given permission to add my own brief comments about the Freedom Museum. I've done several programs with them, and I have to say, as a Chicagoan, I'm quite proud and pleased that we have an institution like the Freedom Museum in our city that takes debate seriously, that walks that fine line between disagreement and discord, and treats members of the public with respect and treats them as the citizens that they actually are. So, congratulations, and I'm proud to be associated with you. It's now my pleasure to announce the winner of the William J. Brennan Award. Will Robert O'Neill and Michelle Lichman join me at the podium? The William J. Brennan Jr. Award recognizes a person or group for demonstrating a commitment to the principles of free expression followed by the late U.S. Supreme Court Justice. Since the award's inception in 1993, it's been presented 4 times. Tonight, the 5th recipient of the award is Judith F. Krug. To present the award is Mr. Robert O'Neill. Mr. O'Neill represents the Thomas Jefferson Center for the Protection of Free Expression. The center is a nonprofit, nonpartisan institution dedicated to protecting free expression in all its forms. To accept the award for Judith Krug is her daughter, Michelle Lichman. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Gretchen. First, a brief note about nomenclature. Like Judy Platt, I always knew and addressed our dear friend and colleague as Judy. But one day, a few years ago, I sensed a slight dissonance, a frown even. So I restated my salutation. I said, "Judith?" And there was a smile. So throughout my brief remarks, it will be Judith. A contrast which, if she were with us, she would certainly appreciate. It's a great honor to be with you for this purpose tonight. As much as I had hoped and expected that this presentation would take place person to person, when I called Judith last December to convey the good news, she was delighted, and we began, in fact, to plan a celebration. She was quite impressed that trustees of our center, as varied as Britt Hume, Sissy Spacek,
Dahlia Lithwick and Norman Dorson were unanimous in their belief that she was the most appropriate person to receive this 5th Brennan Award. Sadly, this is the only time that our honoree has not been able to receive the award in person at a ceremony at the U.S. Supreme Court. It was twice hosted by Justice Brennan himself, and after his death by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who assumed this task in his stead. There wasn't the slightest doubt that either of them would have relished the opportunity to make this presentation had it been possible. Now, there's one interesting tie between Judith Krug and Justice Brennan of which you may not be aware. When Dick Posner and I served 46 years ago as Justice Brennan's law clerks, in those days there were only 2 of us in a term. During that term, the justice asked us to undertake only one non-judicial assignment. He'd been invited to give the keynote speech at the 75th anniversary of the Newark Public Library. As a teenager, a high school student, he had spent many hours shelving and retrieving books in that redoubtable facility. And he thought this provided a first opportunity to apply some of his First Amendment beliefs and principles to the context of libraries, in which, as Dick and I quickly discovered, there's virtually at that time, no applicable case law. But in his opinions and lectures on other subjects, we found ample guidance. So we drafted and he polished and delivered a really extraordinary speech. It was a great hit in downtown Newark. I'm sorry to report it didn't get much attention elsewhere. Then, as today, what happens in Newark tends to stay in Newark. But we hoped and assumed that someday there would be another more visible medium for the expression of these views, and this is, of course, where Judith comes in. When the court agreed in 1981 to review its very first library case, it may indeed have been Steve Pico and his family who filed the complaint in court, but it was unmistakably Judith Krug, working closely with ALA's General Counsel Bill North, who is with us this evening and with whom I've had a chance to chat, that they shaped the arguments that so profoundly influenced the course of First Amendment law. Actually, I should confess that Judith and I had several conversations about the case and about the arguments that should be made, during which I expressed some misgivings about conceding that, for example, a book could be removed from a school library for educational unsuitability or for pervasive vulgarity. But Judith knew better, even about the views of my former boss, to whom the Pico opinion was quite predictably assigned. Without those concessions, I doubt there would have been a plurality, much less a bare majority for the vital principles that came to constitute Justice Brennan's Pico opinion and its progeny. Judith, in her great wisdom, knew that such concessions were essential. She also believed that making those concessions and having them accepted by the court would not return to haunt the protection and principles of the library community, as indeed it is my sense that they never have. I'm often asked, would anybody else have been willing to take such a risk? Would anybody else have had the confidence that everything would turn out as it did and turn out well? That's one of my memories, and it's the one that specifically links Judith and Justice Brennan. Let me now reflect very briefly on a couple of other steps along the way. These address a question that I suspect each of you has asked in the last couple of months, as I have. Where would we be? Where would this free expression community be if Judith Krug had not been our colleague and indeed our conscience? Well, let me offer a couple of fairly recent responses. For one, if she had not mobilized a broad coalition to launch a national conversation about privacy, there's a lot that I think would not have happened, or at least it would have happened very differently. Had she not brought us all together and induced diverse groups to collaborate, well, let's be honest, coerced diverse groups to collaborate on the cause of privacy, I suspect we would all have gone off in our own different directions and would not have collaborated as Judith wanted us to. Let me also reflect on her extraordinary engagement with the subject of library filters. To the amazement of most of us, the long-awaited National Academy of Sciences study of library filters several years ago contained some extremely helpful recommendations and conclusions from what was obviously an exemplary source. That didn't just happen, I can assure you. As many of you know, Judith saw both the potential risk and the potential for success by engaging directly with her usual ferocity. Let's be honest. She gained the ear and the confidence of the Academy's senior scholar in computer science, Herb Lynn, and together they shaped a report that has been immensely helpful. From working closely with Herb on another Academy project, I can attest that he felt the same irresistible pressure that so many of us experienced during our years as Judith's colleagues and devotees. Any lawyer who works in the First Amendment field is keenly aware of Judith's influence in shaping the course of litigation. Indeed, we ought to admit candidly that for 40 years she engaged shamelessly but most effectively in the unlicensed practice of law. It would be impossible to count the times when potential plaintiffs, vital plaintiffs, were either non-existent or understandably reluctant to risk publicly declaring their opposition to popular laws, especially in the perilous period right after September 11th. Yet time and again, Judith emboldened the people she needed to mount a legal challenge, and I'm not aware that any of them ever suffered from heeding her call to the courtroom. Thus, we've seen successful challenges to the Communications Decency Act, the Patriot Act's business records provisions, and the attendant gag rule, the Child Online Protection Act, and numerous other invasive or intrusive measures that stifled free speech, not only for librarians, but for the entire community of intellectual freedom and free inquiry. In fact, I vividly recall one meeting of the Free Expression Network, and some of my FEN colleagues are here, one that focused on litigation strategy. And we were talking, as I recall, about the COPA challenge. Incidentally, speaking of FEN, here again I suspect my colleagues at this table will recall, there were times when those of us in the Washington area failed to get to a FEN meeting, but Judith never failed to get there from Chicago except for one day when O'Hare was snowbound. Well, as the morning wore on, we half expected Judith to arrive by snowmobile or dog sled, apologizing profusely, as she would have done for her tardiness. Well, at this particular meeting, the dilemma was how, in one pending case, one could challenge the use of filters in attacking the Child Internet Protection Act, while at the very same time, in parallel litigation, one could suggest that filters offered a possibly preferable alternative to the crude sanctions imposed by COPA, the other statute that was under attack. After we'd agonized for an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, Judith waved her hand, and said, "Go for it." Now, we weren't entirely sure what it was we were supposed to go for, but when she left the room momentarily, we figured out she meant we should be able to make both arguments simultaneously. Of course, once again, she was right. And while one of these challenges fared better than the other, the COPA strategy prevailed brilliantly. So much for foolish consistency. I guess Emerson was, after all, right. And Emerson, by the way, would have drawn much inspiration from Judith, and perhaps reluctantly, he would have signed on to the national conversation on privacy, but that's for another day. I couldn't in good conscience conclude without briefly applauding Judith Krug's many honors and accomplishments that helped to persuade our center's trustees to add her to the roster of Brennan Award recipients. In more than her 4 decades as ALA's champion of intellectual freedom, she established such now revered traditions as Banned Books Week. Through the Office of Intellectual Freedom, she offered not only solace but direct support to countless librarians and others facing censorship threats. Soon after this auspicious start, she also established the Freedom to Read Foundation as a vehicle for garnering and dispensing tangible support. Though she did not herself seek recognition, it would have been very hard to avoid the tributes, the encomia that increasingly came her way. They are all noted in the program in a list far too long to recite here, and I would therefore simply incorporate by reference that extraordinary list in the program. To this extraordinary roster, I'm now delighted to add the Thomas Jefferson Center's William J. Brennan Jr. Award. And I realize that I forgot to bring the plaque with me, so if my wife Karen would retrieve the plaque and bring it up, it will be ready for presentation momentarily. Thank you. As Gretchen mentioned, this award had its origins very soon after Justice Brennan's retirement from the court. We planned it, in fact, in his chambers, and he was delighted. And the only commitment we made was to confer the award not more often than annually, nor less often than once every 5 years, on a rare, indeed extraordinary person who embodied and applied the principles that so characterized his remarkable career on the court. Well, such people aren't easy to find, and this is only the 5th time in nearly 20 years that we've presented the award. Twice in the past, the award has recognized an entire career of commitment and devotion. The 2 other occasions were more a single act of extraordinary commitment. Judith Krug could have been honored in either way, because hers was both a lifetime of extraordinary dedication and a series of single events and acts that planted the flag for the cause. Let me simply read the inscription, if I may, and then present it to Michelle, and along with it, a check to the Freedom to Read Foundation, which is essentially in lieu of the honorarium that we have in the past given to the recipient. The William J. Brennan Jr. Award, in recognition of a lifetime of extraordinary acts in defense of intellectual freedom and the freedom to read, Judith F. Krug, presented at the American Library Association Annual Conference by the Thomas Jefferson Center for the Protection of Free Expression, July 12, 2009. So, Michelle.
We've all heard the expression, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And while I do have my mother's irreverent and sometimes sick sense of humor, passion for shopping for designer duds, and the nasty habit of reading the end of the book before I've even started it, I know I've passed on this disease to my daughters now, I'm sorry. Regardless of our similarities, I could never hope to match what my mom has achieved professionally. In 1969, my mom founded the Freedom to Read Foundation. It's been said that she gave birth to it that year. Funny, really, because I, too, was born in 1969. The year my twin daughters were born, I strove to take a shower 3 times a week. But my mother, always the overachiever, had a baby and established FTRF. For the next 40 years, she watched us both grow from infancy to adolescence to adulthood. We were both there as she went from red nails to sheer, from heels to sneakers, from United Airlines to United Airlines, and most unfortunately, from health to illness. When my mom's cancer reoccurred last fall, we made it a point to spend even more time together than we already did. In between carpools, PTO, and soccer fields, we picked Tuesday as the one day of the week where I could clear my schedule and come to her house to hang out. We used to call these days Tuesdays with Mummy. Most days we'd sit and chat, and sometimes we would read ahead in our various books. On one of our Tuesdays, she received a call from Robert O'Neill. When it looked like she was going to be on the phone for a while, I cleared out of the room and went to do something else in another part of the house. After all, when my mom got going on a call dealing with the First Amendment, I knew it could take some time. I came back a while later to see if she was off the phone and will never forget the expression on her face. She was simply sitting there, stunned, tears in her eyes. She looked at me and simply said, "I'm getting the Brennan Award. I'm getting the Brennan Award." Whoa! She was so touched, so overwhelmed. For the first time in my life, she had no words to say. So, to Mr. O'Neill and the Thomas Jefferson Center for the Protection of Free Expression, I thank you for this award on my mother's behalf. Receiving it meant so much to her that she was rendered speechless when you called. And if you knew my mom well, that was quite an accomplishment indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Michelle, and the Krug family. That was really lovely. The Founders Award was created with only one honoree in mind, Judith F. Krug. The award recognizes her vision and dedication to protecting our First Amendment rights. As the new director of ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom, Mrs. Krug understood the need to establish a legal defense arm for ALA, an organization that could, if needed, go to court to defend the right of individuals to freely express ideas and to access information. In 1969, the Freedom to Read Foundation was born. Her tireless support and leadership were embodied in the Foundation's active involvement in approximately 200 court cases. A few of the prominent cases are highlighted in the program you all received this evening on page 11. So we encourage you to look at those and remember some of those achievements. Tonight, we celebrate the strong, vital organization Judith envisioned 40 years ago and recognize the force behind it, Judith F. Krug. Here to present the award is Judy Blume. Judy Blume needs a little introduction. She's the author of such beloved classics as Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, Forever, and Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which contains one of the few Gretchens in literature. I like to point that out. Basically, you have Faust and Judy Blume, and those are your Gretchens. Judy Blume is a champion of intellectual freedom, and I'm delighted she's here tonight. Judy, please join me at the podium.
I noticed, Judy, when you were up here that you needed a box. I don't know if I do too, but anyway, I'm here. Michelle, where are you, Michelle? I never knew your mother read the end of the book first. I have a friend who does that, and I'm always scolding her. Last fall, a group of writers gathered here to commemorate Banned Books Week. Judy was between treatments, but she was feisty as ever, and I teased her for wearing what I called a Sarah Palin jacket. Actually, it was a jacket I coveted, and I even tried it on in New York before realizing that all the jackets in my favorite sportswear section of my favorite department store were the very jackets Sarah was sporting on the campaign trail. Judy begged forgiveness. She said she bought it before Sarah came on the scene, and besides, she really liked it. The plan was, of course, that I would present this award to Judith in person. Don't worry about me, she said last fall. I'm way too mean to die. That was her fierce warrior persona. That was her let's laugh about this and talk about something else way of dealing with her illness. We all know the right words to describe Judith, and mean isn't one of them. Just ask her family. Try determined, tough, strong, capable, confident, sharp, witty. Try courageous, loyal, and unstoppable. That was Judith. I met her in Atlanta in 1982 at a Fred Friendly seminar on intellectual freedom moderated by Benno Schmidt, then a professor at Columbia Law School. I was a newly banned author and way out of my element. I felt as if I were back in fourth grade, praying the teacher would call on me. Benno did call on me, and I stumbled through a couple of answers, then watched in awe as the articulate speaker on the opposite side of the table said exactly what I wished I had been able to say, only so much better. I remember thinking, wow, who is this? She's brilliant. She can speak on my behalf any time. That was my introduction to Judith Krug and the beginning of a long friendship, both professional and personal. We weren't the kind of girlfriends who talked all the time, but when we did, it was as if no time at all had passed. It was hard to say no to Judy when she asked you to do something, even if you didn't want to fly to Chicago in September because you were trying to write a book. Because Judy would always, always be there for you. She raced around the country speaking out wherever and whenever she was needed. And when she spoke, she always sounded smart and reasonable. She made it look easy with that smile and that laugh. Anyone here remember the Meese Commission? Where our Attorney General, tell me that you do. Thank you. Where our Attorney General and his committee were going to rid the country of pornography. Not that any of them could actually identify pornography, but they knew it when they saw it. Their report, their fiasco, actually, came out in July 1986, around the same time as an ALA meeting in New York, and Judy asked me to speak. I balked, but Judy convinced me I needed to do it. And so I prepared a little talk called, Is Puberty a Dirty Word? During my talk, I told the story of a boy who was given a copy of one of my books for his bar mitzvah, meaning he was 13. But before his mother let him read it, she told me this story later, she cut out certain pages having to do with puberty, specifically wet dreams. She cut them out with a pair of scissors, she proudly told me, and she said, I did a really nice job of it. I don't think he'll ever know. 10 years later, I met this young man, then a college graduate, and I asked him if he remembered. Sure, he said, but I just went down to the public library and read the book there. Yes. Thank God for public libraries. Judy roared over this story. She was fiercely determined to make sure that censorship would never triumph in the library or the larger world. She'd say to parents, if you don't like something, okay. Tell your kids you don't want them to read it. That works, really, that works. Every once in a while, the kids are going to defy you, but so what? I say that to parents now, too. What are you afraid of? Tell me what you're afraid of. And that quote was so Judith, and part of why I loved her. Like Madeline, my first literary heroine, Judy Krug, showed no fear. Toni Morrison said recently, you have to read, you have to know, you have to have access to knowledge. So, this was Judith's life work. This was her gift to all of us, to make sure we could read, we could know, we could have access to knowledge. And how lucky for us that she acted on her beliefs. Oh, and that jacket that I told you about, the Sarah Palin jacket, thanks to Herb and Michelle and Stephen, that jacket now hangs in my closet. Every time I open the door, Judith, the outstanding shopper, is with me. But I don't have to open my closet door to find Judy, my friend, my hero, because she's here. She would kill me if I get emotional. But I need to tell her that, Judy, your legacy will continue, I promise. We all promise, but damn, we're going to miss you. Herb, will you join me up here? Yes, please.
All right, it's not too late for you to get bets down on when I get emotional. Thank you for this wonderful honor, and I'm going to need a little help from all of you. Each time I say Judy, please correct me. Okay. Judy, thank you, would be disappointed if I did not designate this in the family tradition of an auspicious occasion. I'm sorry. She also mandated the black tie, and she certainly would have called this a celebration. On her behalf, our family and friends want to thank the foundation board, and the members for honoring her with your attendance and with the many tributes that have been presented. I also want to congratulate the McCormick Foundation for their hard work and their contributions toward many of the same goals. Also, I want to thank the staff of the Freedom to Read Foundation, as well as the staff of the Office of Intellectual Freedom, and all the members and staff of the American Library Association. Particular thanks go to Bob Doyle and Bert Joseph for chairing this event, and to Jonathan Kelly and Evelyn Shavel for their extraordinary efforts to make this night a night to remember. Also, congratulations to Bob Doyle for being named as the 2009 Freedom to Read Foundation Roll of Honor Award. It would be presumptuous of me to tell this group how to move forward. For the next 40 years. But I'm sure Judy would want me all to urge you to be proactive in small towns as well as large metropolitan areas, to continue outreach communications, to reprise the lessons of the past as the foundation for the future, and to remind you all that librarians continue and libraries and librarians continue to be threatened, and they will look to the foundation for support. I also want to remind you that Judy, thank you, love to travel not for the sake of amassing thousands of United and frequent flyer miles. Rather, travel allowed her to deliver dozens of speeches a year across the country, speeches that drove home the necessity of fighting censorship on every level and in every medium, speeches that inspired and supported advocates across all 50 states. Please pick up the torch, walk the walk, and continue to enhance her role by supporting the First Amendment at every opportunity. A significant number of friends and family contributed approximately $20,000 to the foundation in Judith's name. That's over and above the dinner here tonight. And I want to announce, since we are no longer supporting the Saks Fifth Avenue Endowment Fund, that we will pledge an additional $10,000 in order to create a separate fund, which I hope the board will designate for some noble purpose. Finally, I would like to leave you with this message. Okay. This is from PBS. Sorry.
People in this country have full and open access to the information that they want and they need, whether or not anyone else in the country likes what they want to see.
One thing I've learned tonight is that all the best women are named Judith. Thank you, Judy Blume and Herb Krug, very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce Scott Turow. Scott Turow is a writer, an attorney, and a beloved Chicagoan. He's the author of 7 best-selling novels, including Presumed Innocent and Personal Injuries. He's also written nonfiction, including 1L, about his experience as a law student, and Ultimate Punishment, which surprisingly is not about taking the bar exam, but is in fact a reflection on the death penalty. His books have been translated into more than 25 languages and sold more than 25 million copies around the world. They've been adapted into a full-length film and 2 television miniseries. Mr. Turow continues to work as an attorney, as a partner in the Chicago office of Sonnenschein, Nath, and Rosenthal. Please join me in welcoming Scott Turow.
Thank you all. Unlike many of the people here, I did not know Judith Krug well. I had only glancing contacts with her when she wanted to encourage me in her uniquely compelling way to support one campaign or another in which she was engaged. And I'm lucky enough to be able to say that I did oblige her from time to time and found her an inspiring and spirited leader on all of those occasions. But I have remarked to a lot of people that I would love to be able to have the kind of legacy that Judy Krug has. Not just the achievements, the cases that are noted in your program, but really the human legacy. Judy Krug was beloved by an extraordinarily wide circle of human beings, and it's been remarkable in the months leading up to and after her passing to hear how often her name has been on the lips of the people who knew her and had contact with her. She was, as I said, this room, this country is really full of people who were just nuts about Judith Krug. So it's a pleasure to be here on this evening. I want to welcome the many of you who come from outside Chicago to our city. I want you to know that the great weather that you are enjoying this weekend, we all take credit for it, because we suffered through a miserable winter to earn it for you. Of course, you can't count on anything too much. One of the great pleasures of living in the era of climate change is that you can live in several places by being in one. Today you had Palo Alto. Last weekend you had Seattle. Nonetheless, I think about my own summers past, and I think particularly of a summer 43 years ago when I was employed in the parts warehouse for the North American headquarters of Porsche automobiles. It was out in Northbrook in those days. And I saw a lot of gorgeous cars that summer and a lot of auto parts. And my boss had been sent to the Chicago area from Germany, had a heavy German accent, and I have to admit it was a somewhat disappointing summer. He had hired me telling me that I would be earning the hourly wage of $1.75, and I was surprised when I got my first paycheck to find that that was not $1.75, but $1.35. Nonetheless, the summer brought what was for me an extraordinary epiphany. I walked into the men's room one day late in the summer, and I looked in the mirror and saw myself and thought, I don't want to be a doctor. I had foisted upon me the ambition of many Jewish boys of my era. My parents, including my father, a doctor, wanted me to be a doctor. And I realized at that moment I did not want to be a doctor. What I wanted to be was a novelist. And in my senior year in high school, I had read James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a young man. It had spoken to me like no book I had ever read. It was the story of my soul, and I wanted to follow in Joyce's footsteps and become a novelist. And so I went off to Amherst College in Massachusetts to follow that ambition and make it real. Fortunately for me tonight, there are in the audience two of my classmates from Amherst, my friend Andy Levitt, my friend Joe Gordon, and I don't know whether they will verify or question what the tales that I'm about to tell. But nonetheless, in those days, I was trying to figure out how I could possibly achieve this ambition. There was no such thing in those days as creative writing classes at a little college like Amherst College. One of my professors suggested that I drop out and write all day in the New York City Public Library. And I thought my poor parents, after finding that I wasn't going to be a doctor, could probably not get up in the morning when they found that I wasn't even going to be a college graduate. So I chose the familiar refuge of would-be writers always. I enrolled in English classes. And in those days, Amherst College was held tightly in the grip of a legendary figure named Theodore Baird, who was the expositor of something called the New Criticism. And basically what the New Criticism provided was that biographical details do not matter. If the author was a cross-dresser who had been raised in a cage, that did not matter in the interpretation of a literary work. Historical events did not matter. If the A-bomb had gone off outside the window of the poet, that didn't matter. The only thing that mattered were the words on the page. That was the entire task of literary interpretation. And in order to emphasize the importance of words on the page, Baird had a number of stratagems. Baird was famous at that time on the Amherst campus as Robert Frost's best friend. Frost, too, had taught at Amherst. And in a literary crowd like this, when I mention that Baird was Frost's best friend, that frequently takes people by surprise because many of them assume that Frost, whom they know something about, had no friends at all. But Baird was an equally curmudgeonly figure, and he would walk into his freshman English class, and he would take out a yellow pencil, and he would walk up to the first young man and say, "What is it?" And the first young man would look up and say, "Why, it's a pencil, Professor." And Baird would hit him across the face with it. And he would then walk up to the second young man and say, "What is it?" And the second young man, of course, would say, "Well, it's a long yellow object, Professor." Whack! He went all the way around the classroom asking that question. What is it? What is it? What is it? Until he finally came back to the front of the classroom after striking each young man and announced, "It's a weapon!" He would then move to the window, and he would point to it and ask the first young man, "What is it?" And the young man, of course, would cower under his desk and from there answer, "It's a window, Professor." "No," Baird would say, "it's an exit." And he would lift the window, step over the sash, and be gone for the remainder of the first class period. Now, these lessons about the power of words, that your perceptions can be altered by a single word, are lessons that have stayed with me throughout my career as both a writer and a lawyer. But at that point, they did not really answer the pressing question, the pressing pedagogical question for me, which was how do you become a novelist? And after my freshman year in college, I returned here to the Chicago area. I was lucky enough to get a job as a substitute letter carrier, a mailman, in Glencoe, Illinois, which is an affluent community north of the city. And I basically carried the mail by day and wrote my novel by night. The novel, which I did finish that summer, was called Dithyramb, which is a Greek term, the meaning of which I no longer fully recall. But Dithyramb told the tale of two young men from the Chicago area who ran away from home in their senior year of high school and went down to Mississippi and then to New Orleans, sort of like Huck and Jim. They followed the river. And in New Orleans, they witnessed the murder of an African-American prostitute. And as I tell the tale, it doesn't really sound all that unpromising to me, but of course most of the novel was set in New Orleans, and I had never been to New Orleans. And it was not surprising, therefore, that when I got back to college, 23 of 23 publishers who saw the manuscript rejected it. But during the summer, I had, as I say, spent my daytimes in the employment of the United States government as a letter carrier. In those days, one of the glories of post office employment was that once you learned your route, you could deliver the mail in far less than the 8 hours that were allotted for the task. Indeed, there was one energetic young man in the post office who came in at 6:30 when we all started, had his route delivered by 9 and held down a